There is a story that appears again and again in different places across different centuries. It does not belong to one country. It does not belong to one religion. And it does not belong to one time. The details change, but the structure remains. A person wants something that cannot be achieved by ordinary means. Time has run out. Resources are gone. The task is impossible. And then an offer appears. Sometimes the offer is spoken aloud. Sometimes it arrives in a dream. Sometimes it is only implied. But it is always the same. Help in exchange for something of value. In older stories, the price is clear. A soul, a name written in blood, a life promised after death. The agreement is final, binding, and irrevocable. And the one who makes it always believes they have outsmarted the terms. What makes these stories endure is not the presence of a devil. It is the moment of agreement, the instant when desperation becomes consent. Across cultures, the bargain appears in different forms. A bridge that cannot be built. A palace completed overnight. A manuscript written faster than human hands could ever manage. In each case, the result defies explanation. And so the explanation becomes supernatural. These stories do not begin with evil. They begin with ambition, with pride, with love, with fear of failure, with the need to achieve something that will not wait. The devil in these stories is not always monstrous. Often he is precise. He does not shout. He does not threaten. He offers terms. And those terms are always tempting because they solve a problem immediately. The bridge will be finished by dawn. The palace will rise in a single night. The book will be complete before sunrise. The impossible becomes possible. What comes later is never discussed at the moment of the deal. The cost is deferred. The consequences are distant. And the human mind is very good at postponing regret. In medieval Europe, these stories were told to explain feats of engineering that felt impossible for their time. Stone arches spanning violent rivers, buildings that appeared too quickly, structures that seemed beyond the skill of local builders. When knowledge exceeds understanding, imagination fills the gap. But these stories were not just explanations. They were warnings. They reminded listeners that shortcuts come with consequences, that ambition unchecked by patience leads to loss, that not every victory is worth its price. What is remarkable is how little the structure of these stories has changed. Only the surface has. The bargain remains. The promise remains. The delayed cost remains. In older centuries, the devil left marks. A hoofprint in stone. A damaged column. A scar in the masonry. Physical proof that the builder was not human. But as time passed, those marks became less literal. The devil became harder to see. The stories grew subtler. The bargain, however, did not disappear. It adapted. This story is not an attempt to prove that the devil exists, nor is it an attempt to dismiss these stories as superstition. Instead, it asks a different question. Why do humans, when faced with the impossible, tell the same story? Why do we return to the idea of a bargain again and again across centuries? And why does the figure offering the deal evolve as we do? To answer that, we must look at the places where these stories became fixed in stone, at bridges that should not exist, at palaces built too quickly, at books written too fast, and at the quiet moment before the deal is made. Because the most dangerous part of the bargain is not the devil. It is the moment when we decide the price is acceptable. In the historic centre of Trento, in northern Italy, stands a building that does not immediately announce itself as unusual. It does not loom over the city. It does not sit on a hill. It blends into the urban fabric like any other early modern palace. And yet, for centuries, it has carried another name, the Palace of the Devil. Its formal name is Palazzo Fugger-Galasso. Built at the beginning of the 17th century, it occupies an entire block with an asymmetrical facade, imposing doors, and an interior courtyard hidden from the street. On paper, it is simply the residence of a wealthy merchant. In memory, it is something else entirely. The palace was commissioned by Giorgio Fugger, a member of the powerful Fugger family. The Fuggers were financiers, traders and industrialists whose wealth rivaled that of monarchs. They funded emperors. They moved markets. They understood money as power. According to records, the palace was built between 1601 and 1602. The speed of its construction immediately attracted attention. Too fast, too ambitious, too elaborate for a private residence built in such a short time. In a city accustomed to gradual change, the palace appeared almost fully formed. Walls rose. Towers took shape. The structure seemed to materialize rather than emerge. And when a building appears to outpace explanation, stories begin to form around it. The most enduring story is this. Giorgio Fugger, desperate to complete the palace within an impossible time frame, made a bargain. The terms vary by telling, but the outcome is always the same. The devil would build the palace in a single night. In return, Fugger would surrender his soul. By morning, the palace stood complete, and the devil, according to the legend, left his mark. In the courtyard of the building, visitors are shown a strange imprint in the stone, an impression said to resemble a cloven hoof, not carved, not engraved, pressed. Whether the mark was created deliberately, accidentally, or later attributed symbolic meaning is beside the point. What matters is that the story attached itself to something tangible, stone, architecture, a physical place where imagination could settle. The legend does not portray the devil as violent or chaotic. He does not destroy. He builds. Efficiently, perfectly, and then he waits. In some versions of the story, the bargain is completed. In others, Fugger outwits the devil through clever wording or delay. The details change, but the structure remains. The palace stands. The price is disputed. The unease persists. The building's features only reinforce the story. The entrance doors are unusually tall, their proportions exaggerated. The facade is asymmetrical, drawing the eye unevenly. The interior spaces feel formal, but closed, ordered but watchful. Nothing is overtly sinister. Everything is slightly off. Writers noticed. Visitors noticed. The story spread. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, travelling through Italy in the late 18th century, recorded the legend in his Italian journey. He did not present it as fact, but he did not dismiss it either. He treated it as part of the cultural atmosphere of the place, a story too persistent to ignore. This is how such legends survive, not because they are believed literally, but because they attach themselves to real structures, real names and real places. They endure through repetition, not proof. The Palace of the Devil is not alone. Across Italy and across Europe, similar stories attach themselves to buildings that appear to have exceeded human limits. Structures that feel rushed, sudden, or disproportionate to their surroundings. When architecture outpaces understanding, explanation turns symbolic. The devil becomes a placeholder, a name for the moment when effort, wealth, or knowledge seem to bypass ordinary constraints. In Trento, the palace still stands, its walls unchanged, its courtyard quiet, the hoofprint still pointed out to those who ask. Whether or not the story is true is not the question. The question is why it was necessary. Why a city needed to explain speed with the supernatural. Why wealth demanded a moral counterweight. And why the price of ambition was imagined as a soul. To understand that, we must look beyond a single palace, beyond one city, beyond one family. Because when the same story appears again and again, attached to bridges, homes, and impossible constructions, it stops being an anomaly. It becomes a pattern. Once the story of the Palace of the Devil is known, it becomes easier to recognize what comes next. Because the palace is not alone. Across Italy, stories attach themselves to structures that share a striking similarity. They are large, they are technically ambitious, and they are said to have been completed in a single night. Most often, these structures are bridges, stone arches spanning deep gorges or violent rivers. Bridges that, for the people who lived beside them, felt impossible to imagine being built by human hands alone. One of the most famous stands in Tuscany, near the town of Borgo a Mozzano. It is known as Ponte della Maddalena, but almost everyone calls it by another name, the Devil's Bridge. The bridge rises in a dramatic, asymmetrical arch over the Serchio River. Even today, it looks unconventional. Its proportions feel daring. For medieval builders, it would have seemed extraordinary. According to the legend, the bridge could not be completed. Every attempt failed. Floods destroyed early efforts. The river undermined foundations. Time ran out. And so, the builder made a bargain. The devil would finish the bridge in a single night. In return, he would claim the soul of the first living being to cross it. The agreement was accepted. By dawn, the bridge stood complete, stone set perfectly, the arch holding firm, the impossible made real. But when the time came to collect the payment, the builder hesitated. Instead of sending a person across the bridge, he released a dog. The animal ran across the stones, unaware of the bargain it fulfilled. The devil, cheated of a human soul, vanished in fury. The bridge remained, strong, enduring, and forever marked by the story of its creation. This structure is not unique. Further north, in Piedmont, another stone bridge crosses the Maira River near the town of Dronero. It too is called Ponte del Diavolo. Here, the legend changes in detail, but not in structure. The bridge required a central stone so large it could not be moved by men. The devil, or in some versions his mother, carried the stone into place during the night. By morning, the bridge was finished. Again, the price was a soul. Again, the devil was tricked. What remains is not just the bridge. It is the explanation. A story told to account for an achievement that exceeded local understanding. Across Italy, similar bridges appear. Different rivers, different builders. The same solution. A desperate agreement. An overnight construction. A bargain narrowly avoided. And a structure left standing as proof that something extraordinary occurred. What matters is not whether these stories are true. What matters is that they appear wherever human skill seemed to outpace expectation. In medieval Europe, bridge building was among the most advanced forms of engineering. It required precise mathematics, deep knowledge of stone, and an understanding of forces that could not be seen. For villagers watching from the riverbanks, the process must have seemed incomprehensible. When knowledge exists without explanation, myth fills the gap. The devil becomes a name for the unknown, a way to make sense of success that feels undeserved or unnatural. These legends also serve another purpose. They reassure. If the bridge was built by the devil, then ordinary people were not expected to understand it. If it required a bargain, then failure was not shameful. The story protects human dignity. There is always a moral resolution. The devil is outwitted. The soul is spared. Cleverness triumphs over raw power. And the bridge remains. Not as evidence of a pact, but as evidence of how humans remember the impossible. As these stories spread, they did not remain confined to bridges. They followed wealth. They followed ambition. They followed architecture that felt too sudden, too grand, too advanced. The devil, once a bridge builder, would soon be credited with something even more intimate. Homes, palaces, places of desire rather than necessity. And it is there, in buildings meant not just to cross rivers but to display status and success, that the bargain takes on a darker weight. There is a crucial difference between a bridge and a home. A bridge is built because it must be. A home is built because it is wanted. And when the bargain shifts from necessity to desire, the stories grow darker. Across Italy and Europe, legends attach themselves not only to bridges, but to houses and palaces said to have been completed too quickly, too perfectly, or under conditions that defy explanation. These are not structures meant for survival. They are symbols of success, status, ambition. In Naples, one such building still stands near the historic centre. It is known as Palazzo Penne. And locally, it has long been called the Devil's Palace. According to legend, the palace was commissioned by Antonio Penne, a royal secretary. In some versions of the story, his ambition was wealth. In others, love. A woman who would agree to marry him only if he could build her a palace in a single night. Facing an impossible demand, Penne made a pact. The devil would construct the palace before dawn. In return, Penne would surrender his soul. The agreement was sealed with a contract written in blood. By morning, the palace stood complete, elegant, solid, beyond dispute. But when the devil returned to claim his payment, the contract revealed a condition. The devil was required to count every grain of wheat scattered across the palace courtyard before the soul could be taken. What he did not know was that the grains had been mixed with pitch. They clung together. Impossible to separate, impossible to count. Realizing he had been deceived, the devil raged. According to the legend, he struck the ground and vanished into a chasm. A well now marks the place where he is said to have disappeared, and the palace remains. This is the point where the story evolves. The devil no longer builds for the community. He builds for individuals, and the bargain becomes personal. Similar stories appear elsewhere. In Malta, a ruined rural structure known as the Devil's Farmhouse carries a comparable legend. Said to have been built in a single night, its strange architectural features felt foreign to local tradition. Rather than accept unfamiliar design, the story explained it as supernatural. The building still stands, abandoned, carrying its name long after its purpose has faded. In Wales, a different variation emerges. Here, folklore speaks of houses erected between dusk and dawn, granting ownership of land by custom. These one-night houses blurred the boundary between law and legend. In some tellings, the builders were aided by something more than human. The devil is not always named, but the logic remains. These homes and palaces differ from bridges in one important way. They are not shared. They belong to someone, The bargain here is no longer about survival. It is about desire, about rising too fast, about having what others do not. In these stories, the devil does not sabotage the structure. He builds it perfectly. The punishment is delayed, subtle, often invisible. What remains is the house itself, a monument to success that arrived too quickly, a reminder that ambition without patience invites suspicion. As wealth and status became more visible in society, these stories followed them. They attached themselves to officials, to merchants, to those whose ascent felt uncomfortable to witness. The devil, once a bridge builder, became a facilitator, a partner, a silent investor. And the question shifted. Not can this be done, but what will it cost? The house stands, the palace endures, and the story survives, not as proof of a demon, but as a warning that when desire replaces necessity, the bargain becomes harder to justify and far more difficult to escape. At some point, the stories shift away from stone. The devil no longer builds bridges or palaces. Instead, he begins to write. Across medieval Europe, several manuscripts appeared that seemed to defy ordinary explanation, not because of what they claimed, but because of what they were. One of the most famous is the Codex Gigas, often called the Devil's Bible. It still exists today. Preserved in Stockholm, the manuscript is enormous, nearly a meter tall, so heavy it takes 2 people to lift. It contains over 300 pages of parchment made from the skins of dozens of animals. Inside, there is an entire Latin Bible. Alongside it are medical texts, calendars, historical chronicles, and lists of local events. Nothing supernatural, nothing occult, just an overwhelming amount of material gathered in a single volume. What makes the Codex unusual is not its content, it is its consistency. Every page appears to have been written by the same hand, the same ink, the same spacing, the same style. From beginning to end, scholars estimate that copying the text alone would have taken decades. And yet, the manuscript shows no variation, no change in handwriting, no sign of aging. This uniformity gave rise to a story that the book was written in a single night. According to legend, a monk condemned to be sealed alive promised to create a book that would glorify his monastery forever. As the night wore on, he realized the task was impossible, and so he turned elsewhere for help. One page of the manuscript became central to the legend, a full-page illustration of the devil, alone, framed by empty space. Staring outward, the image is striking not because it is frightening, but because it is isolated. It does not accompany spells or curses. It simply exists, as if acknowledging the bargain that made the book possible. Whether the legend is true or not, the manuscript remains a physical anomaly, a book whose scale, consistency, and execution resist simple explanation. A different kind of mystery appears in another manuscript, the Voynich manuscript. Unlike the Codex Gigas, this book cannot be read at all. Its pages are filled with unknown symbols, strange diagrams, plants that resemble nothing found in nature, figures bathing in green pools connected by pipes and chambers. No known language matches the text. No cipher has been conclusively identified. No translation has held. Carbon dating places the manuscript in the early 15th century. Its materials are authentic. Its ink is period correct, but its meaning remains sealed. Because the book cannot be entered, stories formed around it. The manuscript was said to contain forbidden knowledge, secrets not meant to be understood, information that arrived without explanation. Again, the devil was blamed, not because the book spoke of him, but because no one else could be credited. These stories mark another evolution. The devil no longer builds structures in public. He produces knowledge in private. The bargain is no longer visible. It is hidden inside text, inside symbols. Inside, meaning withheld. The fear here is not destruction. It is comprehension without effort. Knowledge without process, understanding divorced from experience. These manuscripts did not need to be evil. They only needed to be too complete or too opaque. When something exceeds the limits of explanation, the story returns. Someone helped. Something intervened. In this way, the written devil becomes a figure of acceleration. He does not invent knowledge. He collapses the time required to obtain it. The cost is not immediate. The manuscript does not burn. The pages do not rot. The cost appears later. In obsession, in isolation, in the belief that knowledge can be separated from the work that gives it meaning. These books survive not because of their legends, but because they remain unresolved. They sit on shelves, under glass, still resisting easy understanding, and in their silence, they continue to provoke the same question. What happens when the process is removed? And what is lost when knowledge arrives too quickly? By the early modern period, the story of the bargain had condensed into a single name, Faust. Unlike bridges or palaces, Faust was not a place. He was a man, or rather, a character drawn from several real figures. Scholars, alchemists, doctors, men whose learning exceeded what their world could comfortably explain. The earliest written versions of the Faust story appeared in Germany in the 16th century. They described a learned man, Dr. Johann Faust, dissatisfied with the limits of human knowledge. He had studied theology, medicine, astronomy, alchemy, and still it was not enough. Faust did not want survival. He did not want shelter. He wanted understanding without delay, power without patience, experience without restraint. According to the story, Faust summoned a figure known as Mephistopheles. Not a monster, not a beast, but an articulate presence, a negotiator. The terms were clear. In exchange for unlimited knowledge, pleasure, and influence during his lifetime, Faust would surrender his soul after death. The agreement was signed in blood. What follows is not chaos, it is success. Faust gains access to forbidden texts. He performs demonstrations that astonish onlookers. He predicts events. He acquires wealth. He moves freely through courts and cities. The devil does not rush him. There is no immediate punishment. The bargain works exactly as promised. In some versions of the story, Faust becomes a celebrity. In others, a private figure, consumed by study and indulgence. But always, the pattern is the same. Achievement without resistance. Progress without effort. The cost is not visible at first. Faust becomes isolated. Ordinary human concerns fade. Relationships lose meaning. The world narrows to appetite and ambition. Eventually, the debt comes due. In early versions, Faust is torn apart, his body found broken, his study destroyed. The conclusion is abrupt and violent. Later retellings soften the ending. Faust seeks redemption. He hesitates. He reflects. But the contract remains binding. What makes the Faust story different from earlier legends is its clarity. Nothing is implied. Nothing is symbolic. The bargain is explicit. The reward is tangible. The cost is absolute. Unlike the palace builder or the monk, Faust is not desperate. He is already accomplished, already educated, already respected. This is what makes the story unsettling. The bargain is not made from fear. It is made from dissatisfaction. Faust does not lack opportunity. He lacks limits. The story spread quickly. It was printed, illustrated, translated, adapted. By the time Goethe rewrote Faust in the 19th century, the character had become something else. Not a cautionary tale, but a mirror. Goethe's Faust is reflective, restless, searching. He is not punished immediately. He is examined. The devil too changes. Mephistopheles becomes ironic, patient, almost amused. He does not force the bargain. He waits for consent. This version of the story is quieter, more dangerous, because the agreement feels reasonable. Faust wants knowledge. The devil offers it. The exchange feels almost fair. This is where the story completes its evolution, from bridges to palaces to books. to a man who wants everything. The devil no longer builds structures. He builds careers, reputations, influence. Faust does not need a miracle. He needs acceleration. And that is why the story endures. Because it no longer belongs to folklore. It belongs to ambition itself. By the time the story of Faust was printed and retold, the devil had already crossed several thresholds. He had built bridges. He had raised palaces. He had written books. He had entered the mind of a scholar. There was only one space left untouched. The sacred. Across Europe, certain churches and cathedrals carry marks that are said to belong to the devil, not hidden in shadow, but preserved in plain sight. In Munich, inside the Frauenkirche, a dark footprint is embedded in the floor near the entrance. Visitors still stand in it today. The mark is known as the Teufelsschritt, the devil's footstep. According to legend, the architect made a pact to complete the cathedral. The devil agreed to help, under one condition. The building must have no windows. When construction was finished, the devil stepped inside and stood at a precise spot from which the windows were concealed by columns. Believing he had been honored, he stamped the floor in approval. But when he moved further into the church, the light from the hidden windows revealed the deception. He had been tricked. The footprint remains as proof of his presence. The story does not describe destruction. The cathedral still stands. It functions as intended. The mark on the floor is simply part of the building now. Elsewhere, in the Czech Republic, Huska Castle sits in an unusual position. Unlike most fortifications, its defensive walls face inward. Its windows overlook courtyards rather than surrounding landscape. Legend claims it was built over a gateway to hell, constructed not to keep invaders out, but to keep something in. No army attacked from below. No demons emerged. But the castle remains. And so does the story. Other churches across Europe carry similar associations. Foundation legends speak of sacrifices buried within walls to ensure structural stability. In some traditions, animals were said to be placed within foundations. In darker versions, a human life was required to bind the building to the earth. Whether these accounts are literal or symbolic, they reveal something important. When a structure is sacred, its completion demands explanation beyond skill alone. A bridge serves function. A palace displays wealth. A church represents eternity. To attach the devil to a church is not to desecrate it. It is to acknowledge the magnitude of what was built. These legends often include clever reversals. The devil is deceived, the contract misinterpreted. The sacred space survives. And yet, the mark remains. A footprint, a crack, a story whispered to visitors. The devil in these stories does not conquer the sacred. He touches it. He brushes against it. He leaves a trace. By this point in the evolution of the legend, the devil is no longer a brute force. He is woven into the narrative of construction itself, into ambition, into devotion, into architecture meant to last centuries. And then, gradually, even these visible marks become unnecessary. No footprint is required, no gate to hell, no buried foundation. The sacred space shifts from stone and mortar to institutions, to systems, to structures that no longer require visible foundations. The devil no longer needs to enter through the church door. He enters through agreement, through consent, through the belief that the exchange is worth it. By the time the story of Faust was written down, the devil no longer needed to hide. The bargain had become explicit, named, signed, understood. In the centuries that followed, the figure of the devil began to fade from view. But the structure of the bargain did not. The exchange simply changed its form. Modern life no longer requires bridges to be built overnight. Engineering is explained. Processes are documented. Knowledge is distributed. And yet, the desire for acceleration remains. Success without delay. Recognition without obscurity. Influence without apprenticeship. In earlier stories, the bargain was made in secret. In modern life, it is often written openly, in contracts, in agreements, in terms that promise immediate gain in exchange for future cost. The language has changed. The structure has not. Where medieval builders feared floods and collapse, modern individuals fear obscurity, irrelevance, being left behind. The bargain now offers speed, access, visibility, power, not through magic, but through systems. In this form, the devil does not appear as a creature. He appears as an opportunity. The modern bargain does not ask for a soul. It asks for time, for attention, for compromise, for alignment with values not fully examined. In older legends, the cost was dramatic. A life, a damnation, a violent end. In modern versions, the cost is quieter. Burnout, disconnection, the erosion of meaning. This is why the devil no longer needs to build. He no longer needs to write. He only needs to wait. Stories reflect this shift. In contemporary retellings, the devil is no longer monstrous. He is articulate, reasonable, often polite. He offers choice, not coercion. The agreement feels fair. The terms are clear. The danger is subtle. This version of the bargain is more difficult to reject because it rarely feels like one. Acceleration becomes normal. Excess becomes expected. Rest becomes optional. The price is paid later, in ways that are harder to trace, harder to name. The devil no longer leaves marks in stone. He leaves patterns. Patterns of behavior. patterns of sacrifice, patterns of success achieved too quickly to be questioned. And this is why the story persists. Not because people believe in the devil, but because they recognize the bargain. It appears whenever the pace becomes unnatural, whenever the reward arrives without resistance, whenever something feels gained without being earned. The devil, in this sense, has not disappeared. He has become abstract, diffuse, embedded, no longer a figure at the edge of a bridge, but a presence at the edge of decision. When stories endure for centuries, it is rarely because they are exciting. They endure because they attach themselves to things that remain. Stone, ink, places that can still be visited. Across Europe, the structures tied to these bargains still stand. They have not vanished with belief. They have not collapsed with doubt. They remain part of the landscape. In Trento, Palazzo Fugger-Galasso still occupies its block in the historic centre. Its courtyard is quiet, its walls unchanged. Visitors can still see the mark in the stone, said to be the devil's footprint. Whether the story is believed or not, the building endures. In Tuscany, the Ponte della Maddalena continues to carry traffic across the Cerchio River. Its asymmetrical arch still holds. The river still runs beneath it. The bridge does exactly what it was built to do. And its name has not been forgotten. In Piedmont, the bridge at Dronero still spans the Mara River. The massive central stone remains in place. The structure functions as intended. The legend remains attached. Further north, the Teufelsbrücke still crosses the Schellenen Gorge in Switzerland. Storms still move through the valley. The bridge still stands where earlier attempts failed. And the story is still told. In France, the fortified Pont Valentré remains incomplete by design. A single stone is said to be loosened each night by a demon. Engineers maintain the structure. The explanation persists. In Bulgaria, the Diavolsky. Most still reflects in the river below. Its arches unchanged. Its name unchanged. The story still alive. These structures do not require belief to function. They require gravity, balance, material knowledge, and time. The same is true of the manuscript. In Stockholm, the Codex Gigas rests behind glass. Its pages intact, its scale unchanged, its handwriting still uniform from beginning to end. The book exists whether the legend is believed or not. Elsewhere, the Voynich manuscript remains untranslated. Its symbols still resist entry. Its diagrams still provoke speculation. No legend has replaced the need to understand it, and no understanding has erased the legend. These objects survive because they occupy a space between explanation and mystery. They are real, they can be measured, but they cannot be fully resolved. This is where the stories find their power, not in proof, but in persistence. As centuries passed, the figure of the devil began to change. He no longer appeared as a builder of bridges or a writer of books. He became something quieter, more familiar. In the modern world, the structures still appear, not always in stone, not always in ink, achievements that seem to arrive overnight, success without visible apprenticeship, influence that appears fully formed, systems that move too quickly to be seen. The feeling is the same. A subtle discomfort, a sense that something has bypassed the usual limits. In earlier centuries, that discomfort produced stories of bargains, of devils, of souls exchanged for speed. In the present, the names have changed. The language has softened. The agreements are written differently. But the question remains, what was exchanged? And when will the cost appear? The modern bargain does not announce itself. It rarely feels dangerous. It offers convenience, acceleration, relief from waiting. The price is not immediate. It arrives later, quietly, in ways that are harder to trace. Burnout, disconnection, the erosion of meaning. The devil no longer needs to leave marks in stone. He leaves patterns, patterns of behavior, patterns of compromise, patterns of success achieved too quickly to be questioned. This is why the story never disappears. It does not rely on belief. It relies on recognition. The archive does not tell us whether the devil exists. It shows us that the bargain does, and that it has always taken the shape of whatever we value most. Bridges when survival mattered. Palaces when status mattered. Books when knowledge mattered. And now, speed. The places remain. The books remain. The stories remain. They wait quietly, not demanding belief, only attention. And perhaps that is why these stories have never truly ended. They do not warn us about monsters. They warn us about impatience.